Welcome to Fear Circuit. Today we're venturing deep into the heart of insert location theme based on title, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for of the most disturbing true horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. The locals don't speak loudly about what happens out here. They lower their voices, like the night itself is listening. Old road signs bend in the wind, and dogs refuse to follow their owners past certain fences after dusk. Strange radio bursts ride the static. Names are whispered in empty rooms. Tonight's case file, video title. We're not here to prove anything. We're here to listen to the patterns, the cold spots that move, the lights that think, and the footsteps that stop when you turn around. If you've ever felt watched on a silent road, you'll recognize the feeling. The stories overlap like rings in dark water, separate ripples pushing toward the same unseen center. That's where we're headed now. Keep your voice low, keep your eyes on the edges, and if something calls your name, don't answer. Just keep walking. Story 1. The Lanterns That Walk the Sabine River. I grew up on the Texas side of the Sabine River, outside Deweyville, down a gravel road so narrow you could brush pine needles with your knuckles if you stuck your hand out the window. If you don't know the Sabine, it draws the line between Texas and Louisiana, brown and slow and wider than it looks from the bank. Folks fish it at night because the catfish bite better after the heat breaks and because the mosquitoes don't carry you off when there's a breeze coming up from the water. The first time I saw the lanterns, I was 29, on July 3, 2021, and the heat index had been hovering at 98 degrees all day. Around 10:40 p.m., I parked my pickup at a spot locals call Gunner's Bend, a rutted turn-in with a warped picnic table and a trash barrel that's never been emptied as long as I can remember. I cut the engine, let the cicadas and the smell of hot mud flood into the cab, and walked down the short slope to the water with a thermos of coffee, a pair of cheap headlamps, and a folding chair that always pinched my fingers but never broke. There was no moon, just a hazy smear of stars and the glow from a drill site way off beyond the tree line. The river looked lazy, like it was pretending to sleep. I laid out my lines, checked my knots, and settled in around 11:05 p.m. About 20 minutes later, I noticed a light on the far side, a pale yellow like an old kerosene lantern, but steadier. No jitter, no bright center. I thought it was someone night fishing over in the reeds, which happens all the time. I took a sip, watched it. Then the light moved. Not drifted. Moved, like a person was carrying it. But the path was wrong. It slid against the current and stopped where a rotted post stuck out of the water a few yards from my bank. That post is all that's left of a little dock that washed away when the Sabine jumped her banks in 2016. The light hovered there at about shoulder height, and in the silence between cicada bursts, I heard what my brain read as boots on wet wood. 2 slow steps, then nothing. I remember whispering, "Who's there?" Even though I knew sound carries across water, and I didn't want to be the fool yelling at a neighbor. The light lifted and moved again, making a short line parallel to the shore, then toward me, stopping exactly where the old dock would have ended if it still existed. It was so quiet I could hear the tiny splash where my line bobbed. The light only made the darkness around it feel thicker, like it pressed the night backward. I turned my headlamp up to full and clicked it on. The beam cut a cone, lit up rain gnats and humidity. There was nothing to paint, no post, no pirogue, no man standing hip-deep with waders, just the light and the suggestion of a shape behind it that didn't reflect anything. The headlamp flickered and went dead. I smacked it with the heel of my hand and the battery door popped open. I swore out loud, real human, real stupid, and that felt like proof I was awake. The light didn't respond. It drifted back a few feet, then angled like someone had turned their wrist to look at me through glass. The river pushed a cool breath at my knees. My phone buzzed in my pocket at 11:32 p.m. A text from my neighbor Wade. "You out at Gunner's? Thought I saw your truck." I thumbed back. "Yeah, come down if you want." I put the phone away and the light moved again. Downstream this time, keeping the same distance from me, like it was avoiding a line I couldn't see. When Wade's headlights rolled into the turnout, the light stopped and sank until it wasn't there at all, like someone dimmed it through the river in slow motion. I stood there staring at the exact spot where it disappeared until Wade shuffled up beside me and said, "What's got you spooked? You look..." like you saw an alligator climb a ladder. I just told him I thought I'd seen a lantern on the Louisiana side and it moved weird, and he laughed and said something about coon-ass fireflies, the kind of joke we make that isn't mean until you hear yourself say it out loud, and it is. We set up his rods, talked about nothing. I didn't say the part about the footsteps on wood that wasn't there. At 12:11 a.m., while Wade was tying on a new weight, the light came back. Same position, same height. Only this time there were two of them, side by side, separated like a pair of shoulders. Wade whispered, "What the hell?" And his voice sounded like we were in church. We watched the lights walk an invisible path, then stop in perfect line with that buried dock. A bullfrog croaked to our left, and all three of us, me, Wade, and whatever that was, seemed to acknowledge one another. Then both lights lifted, took 2 steps forward we couldn't hear but could feel, a pressure, a damp shift, and they went out. My watch beeped 12:15 a.m. I could have convinced myself it was a trick of reflections, someone's porch, a boat beyond the bend. But there are no houses on that stretch, and you can't get a boat through the logjam a quarter mile down except in daylight. And even then, you'd leave scratches in the mud for a week. I saw the lights again 4 times that month. They always came on still nights, after 11 p.m., when the air hung heavy as a damp coat. They moved the same way every time, like a person walking a short plank, and I always heard those 2 steps on wet wood that didn't exist anymore, just once, never more. If I turned my headlamp on, it died. If I called out, the lights turned slightly, like a head. I never saw a face, never heard a splash. Just the Sabine breathing, and the lights keeping a boundary I didn't know how to describe. By late August, the stories had started to circle back to me from people who didn't know I well, as the one who'd first said anything. The small-town loop can turn gossip into shared memory faster than mold turns bread, and I was trying to keep my name off anything that sounded like superstition. But at Thibs' bait shop in Orangefield one morning, 8:05 a.m., hot already, the glass door fogged with someone's breath, an older man with a LSU cap touching the brim asked if I ever night fished near the old gunner's place. I told him sometimes, and he lifted one eyebrow like he'd caught a familiar sting. He said he used to deliver propane down there in the 90s, that after the 1994 flood there were rumors about a man who tried to fix his dock in the dark while the river was still high. The board slipped, he slipped, the river carried him under the plank and pinned him there. They pulled him out at dawn. The old man shrugged. "People forget water remembers," he said, and he paid for his crickets and left. I was thinking about that the night the lights followed me home. It was September 18th, a Saturday, and I left the river around 1:22 a.m. because an odd little static had started in my left ear, the cheap kind of tinnitus that sounds like a radio trying to find a station. My drive back is 12 minutes if I hit the washboard patch right. I saw the glow in my side mirror at the second curve, a soft yellow not much brighter than a candle shielded with 2 hands, holding its place about 20 yards behind my tailgate. I told myself it was just a truck farther back than it looked. I tapped my brakes to be courteous. The light tapped its brightness down in response, or my mind invented that part right then to make everything feel less ugly. I took the turn onto my road and checked again. No headlights, just the glow moving at the same careful pace, like it would not be rushed. I pulled into my drive, cut the engine, and listened. Night doesn't do silence here. It does layers. Tree frogs, the whir of a neighbor's AC, the remote hum of a highway I can only hear when the air is wet. I heard all that, and underneath it a creak exactly like a board being tested by a cautious foot. My porch has 3 steps, 2 good, 1 soft. I felt stupid running up them, but I did. When I locked the door, I felt something in my back teeth, on the fillings. A pressure, like the low churn of a passing barge, except there are no barges on our stretch of the Sabine. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched through the slats of the blinds as a warm spot blossomed in the center of my yard, then rose until it was level with the bottom of the window. It paused, as if the lantern bearer were looking over the sill with me, and then it withdrew. I didn't sleep, but I did lie down, phone in my hand. At 3:06 a.m., I texted my sister in Beaumont. "Weird lights out here tonight. Probably kids." She replied at 6:41 a.m. "Kids don't carry gas lamps." I laughed when I read it, because jokes hold the line where fear wants to overrun. The following week, I talked to a dispatcher I know in Newton County, just Jay, I won't use his full name here, and asked if anyone had been calling in about lights by the river. He paused long enough for me to hear the hummed rubber of whatever equipment they use, then said, "We get calls like that every fall. Starts when the water goes low and the heat breaks. You want me to tell you what I tell them? I said, sure. I tell them don't go out there alone. And if you hear your name, you need to say it back wrong, like they mispronounced it. I didn't answer. He said, listen, man, I know how it sounds, but when you're on the radio at 2 a.m., you hear a lot of people who don't have anybody else to talk to. Sometimes the river's what they've got, and at times the river talks back. On October 1st, I left my porch light off and sat on the steps with a beer I didn't drink. The air had that thin bite the first real cool fronts bring. The whine of the mosquitoes dropped off. I waited, not because I wanted proof, but because I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. At 12:22 a.m., a glow built at the edge of my yard, right where the St. Augustine grass gives up and weeds carry you to the ditch. It rose to about the height of a face and then shifted right, then left, 2 small arcs, like someone weighing which path to take. I'm not going to the river, I said out loud, and hearing my voice made the air feel too private, like talking in a church when you're alone. The light froze. Then it faded. The sky thinned toward gray around 5:30 a.m., and I went inside and made eggs I didn't eat. The next night, nothing. The night after, nothing. I told myself the nights with nothing were evidence that the ones with something were me being tired, hot, human. I went back down to Gunner's Bend on October 12th with Wade and his teenage nephew who wanted to prove he wasn't scared of anything. We got there early, 9:15 p.m., and played rods like we were teaching a class, everything neat, all our tricks on display. The river made its flat, soft sound against the bank like someone smoothing a sheet. At 11:03 p.m., the first light came on. The boy said, "Cool," like it was a drone toy. The second light lit beside it. The boy smiled at us and tried to stand where he could see the source. He couldn't. The lights took 2 steps forward, the same distance I'd come to expect, and stopped. Wade whispered, "We're leaving." And I said, "In a minute." I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I thought if they did exactly what they always did, if the pattern held true in front of other people, it would make it manageable, like a known risk. The boy took a step closer to the bank. The lights turned, a tiny angle of attention. I felt the pressure in my teeth again, and a cool seam opened down my back like sweat, except I was cold. Then a third light lit up behind them, farther out in the river, lower. It rose as if climbing the invisible steps. The boy took another step forward. "Don't," I said too sharply, and my voice skittered outward into the trees and came back thin. He looked at me, confused, and laughed to show he wasn't a child, and when he did, the third light drifted sideways, holding level with the other 2, and stopped. All 3 lifted at once. Wade said, "Nope," and walked backward, keeping his eyes on them like they were dogs that might bite. He touched the boy's shoulder and the boy pulled away. "They're just lights, man," he said. "You can throw a rock." He bent and his hand closed on a chunk of dried mud. Before he could straighten, the first light, the one that always led, moved a single pace forward and stopped at the end of the invisible dock. The sound of a foot on wet wood came clear then, honest, for all of us. A slow weight down and a patient release. The boy let the mud fall out of his hand. We left without our chairs, without our bait bucket, without anything. The only thing I took was the habit of locking my truck twice. I'm telling this now because this past spring, April 9th, 2023, I drove down to Sabine Pass to clear my head, to look at the wide water and pretend the river empties itself of everything it carries. I stayed late, watched the tankers crawl like apartment buildings with their own night skies. On the way back, I stopped at an all-night gas station in Bridge City. While I was paying, a woman in scrubs at the next register was talking to the cashier about her cousin who'd drowned in the Sabine back in 2016 right after the floods. She said he'd been trying to move boards on a dock. She said the river kept him just under, unseen, until morning. She said some people still leave a light out when they go down there at night. To show him the way, I guess. The cashier made a face like she didn't want that story anywhere near her register. I drove home with my radio off, not because I was scared, but because the quiet felt like the only true thing. I meant not to look at the river as I crossed the bridge, but I always look. It's a reflex, like checking for someone in your rear view. The surface was black except where the bridge lights smeared it silver. and then I saw a pale yellow point traveling steadily upstream, keeping close to the center, moving like a patient man with a load he can't set down. I told myself it was a skiff, a single light, someone with a thermos and a better motor than I could hear. But it didn't bob right, it didn't mark, it just went on. That night, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number, a voicemail. When I played it, there was the watery hiss you hear when someone calls you from a bad spot, and then a breath like wind in tall grass, and then my name, said correctly the first time, and then again, just slightly wrong. My last vowel bowed and stretched like a plank that's taken on water. I don't live on the river, it's 3 miles from my front door. But somehow, when I stood very still in my kitchen in the dark, I could hear the slow, careful creak of a foot testing a board that isn't there anymore, somewhere between me and the tree line. I stood there until 3:07 a.m., when the refrigerator kicked on and broke whatever had coiled around. The house. I went outside and sat on the top step. The yard smelled like rain, though it hadn't rained. Far off, a dog barked twice. The power lines hummed a long, low note that I felt more than heard. A neighbor's porch light flared and died. I stared at the edge of my yard where the grass gives up to the ditch and thought about what the old man said at Thibs, about the river remembering. I tried to put it all in a sensible order in my mind. Phosphorescent gas, tricks of the eye, a low bank reflecting headlights from a distant road. But my head knows something my mouth keeps refusing to admit. On certain nights, a shape carries its light as if it wants to be seen, and it will walk where you know there's nothing to step on, and if you acknowledge it, it will follow you home at a pace that doesn't hurry and doesn't end. I haven't been back to Gunner's Bend since July. I don't fish at night anymore. I keep my porch light off because I've learned the dark is more honest. Do what you want with this. Say I was tired or spooked or primed by gossip. Tell yourself it's swamp gas or an angler with a strange taste in lamps. But if you ever find yourself by the Sabine on a still night after 11 o'clock p.m. and you see a yellow glow pause where an old dock used to be, keep your head down and don't say your name out loud. And if you get a voicemail you can't explain from a number you don't recognize, and you hear the water breathing and the plank creak, and your name said twice, first right, then a little wrong, don't call it back to correct it. Just turn off the light and step away from the window. I wish I could tell you that works. I wish I could tell you it stops coming when you stop looking. But last night, at 12:19 a.m., my landline rang. The number from the evidence locker that doesn't exist. The line Jay swears isn't real. And when I lifted the receiver, all I heard was a lantern being set down on wet wood, careful as a hand on your shoulder, waiting for you to answer which way you're going to walk. Story 2, mile marker. 47, the car with its lights off. I didn't believe in cursed places until I started working nights on the stretch of highway where the pines narrow down and the world feels like it's only 2 lanes wide. If you've ever driven US 190 east of Woodville, you know what I mean. No streetlights, long black ribbons between small towns, deer that stand on the shoulder like statues until a breath moves them. I picked up the night shift at a warehouse in Jasper after my divorce, partly for the extra pay, partly because I couldn't sleep anyway. Most nights I took the same route home, and most nights it was boring in the way that feels safe. Radio low, coffee warm, cruise control steady. The first time I passed mile 47 and saw the car with its lights off, it was February 6, 2022, at 2:11 a.m. The weather app said 38 degf, light fog. There was a thin mist that made the reflectors float like eyes. The car was a dark sedan angled onto the gravel shoulder, nose toward the ditch like it had rolled to a stop and given up. No hazards, no running lights. The weirdest part was that the rearview mirror was tilted down, pointed at the driver's seat instead of the road behind. I slowed a little and glanced over. Nobody in the driver's seat. No one standing outside either. Just my headlights sliding over a dull shape and the cold white of the mile marker, 47, in the beam. I kept going. You don't stop for every stalled car in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m., even if you remember what it feels like when no one stops for you. Still, it itched at me. At 2:26 a.m., when I pulled into my driveway west of Kirbyville, I texted my friend Kyle, who runs tow for the county. Dead sedan at MM47, lights off, might be abandoned. He thumbed back at 2:27 a.m. On it in the morning. I must have fallen asleep around 3:40 a.m. and jolted awake at 4:12 a.m. to what sounded like a car door thunkin'. G shut outside my bedroom. I went to the window, saw only my porch and the black space beyond it, and told myself it was the heater kicking off weird. 2 days later, same drive, same time, 2:09 a.m. Now, because my line was faster, I saw the car again, same place, same angle, no lights. This time the mirror was tilted all the way toward the windshield, like someone was trying to blind themselves with their own reflection. I lifted my foot and coasted past. A minute later my phone buzzed in the console, unknown number. I put it on speaker and let it go to voicemail. When it ended, a text came through from Kyle at 2:13 a.m. Drove 190 earlier, no sedan at 47. I pulled over at a church parking lot with a broken steeple light and played the voicemail. It was all road noise and then a half-whispered, "Hey," the kind of sound someone makes when they're testing whether you're on the line. Then there was a click where it should have ended, but it didn't. It kept recording open, like someone stayed. After 20 seconds, I heard the soft groan of a seat being adjusted and a breath close enough that my phone speaker fuzzed. Then nothing. The timestamp said it was recorded at 2:10 a.m., which is when I had been driving past mile 47, which is when I had not been on the phone with anyone. I told myself a dozen normal things: pocket dial, spoofed number, some app glitch. At work the next night, I asked Eric on nights if he'd ever heard stories about that marker, the way you ask for a cigarette when you haven't smoked in years, like pretending you're asking for something else. He said, "Oh, you mean the car with the lights off? Too fast, too easy." He said it like he'd been waiting for someone to bring it up. He said his cousin hit it once, or hit where it should have been, and the bumper cracked like ice on a puddle and there was nothing to pay for, nothing to claim. He said when you see it with the lights off, don't touch your rear view. If you touch your rear view, it starts using yours, he said. And then he laughed because saying it out loud made it sound like a campfire dare. But he didn't look at me when he laughed. He looked at the clock on the wall, like he wanted to skip ahead past the part where he'd set it. A week later, on a Thursday that still smelled like rain, though the sky was brittle clear, I left work late, 2:53 a.m., and took the long way home to avoid thinking about it. I passed mile 45 and 46 easily. At 47, my chest tightened like a seatbelt had locked. No car, no sedan at all. I laughed, a stupid, breathy sound in my own true "cuck," and said, "See?" out loud, picking a fight with nobody. That's when the check engine light came on for 2 seconds, just 2, and my radio cut to dead air. The screen showed the song still playing, but the sound was blank, like when you pinch the stem of a headphone cord and the world drops out. I glanced at the rear view because that's what you do when a sound changes. You check if there's someone behind you. The mirror, which I hadn't touched since the afternoon, was pointed down at the top of my seat back. I adjusted it with 2 fingers. It moved too easily, like it had been nudged recently. In the glass I saw the faint outline of another car's interior, not mine, like when you stand in a window at night and get both outside and your kitchen at once. The back seat looked old, cloth bench, and ash burn in the center. A shape sat where the driver should be in that reflection, head angled as if listening. I blinked, and the mirror showed only my truck. I told myself it was the overlay of the dark behind me and the reflection of my own dash. I told myself anything. I didn't touch the mirror for the rest of the drive. But when I got home at 3:18 a.m., the mail flag on my box, down when I left, was standing straight up like someone had flipped it, and in my porch light I saw a fingerprint smudge on the glass of my front door at the height of someone sitting and reaching. I slept on the couch with the TV on mute. At 4:35 a.m., my security camera pinged with motion detected. In the clip, my driveway is a white rectangle and the street is a black stripe. Nothing moves except fog. But the sound, which the camera sometimes picks up and sometimes doesn't, caught a single hollow click exactly like the sound of a dome light being pushed on. The next morning, I opened my truck and the top light didn't come on. The switch was already in the on position. I flipped it off and back on, and it worked like normal. I didn't tell anyone about that because it was too small, too easy to shrug off, and because I'd stopped liking the way people tilted their heads when I talked about the night. When my ex brought our daughter over that weekend, I found myself insisting we leave for the park while it was still bright, corralling them into the car with an urgency I didn't explain, pretending it was about nap schedules and not a mile marker 2 towns away. On the drive back, my daughter Lily, who was 5 then and full of curious cruelty the way kids are like tiny scientists, asked why I kept checking the mirror. I said habit. She said, "It's okay, Daddy. He's not looking at you right now." like it was nothing, like she was telling me the time. I must have made a sound because she followed it up fast with something about clouds that looked like animals, and we didn't speak about it again. That night I drove a different road home, an extra 15 minutes, but around 2:07 a.m. I felt that same pressure in the cabin that happens when a car passes you and the air tightens. Only nobody passed me. My phone lit up face down in the cup holder. Unknown number again. I didn't answer, but I watched the screen count the call time even after it should have kicked to voicemail. 0001, 009, 021, a minute, 3. It stopped at 4:47, which I noticed later, not because of the length but because of the numbers. I played the message in my kitchen with the back door locked and the exhaust fan on for noise. It was colder than the first one, more space in it, like a big empty car with no cloth to catch the sound. Then there was a whispery shuffle and a breath not in the speaker of the phone, but behind me, in the kitchen. I turned off the fan and listened hard to both rooms, the one in my house and the one inside the phone. In both, I heard a single fingertip drag across glass. I returned to work after that like normal people do when bad nights fold back into regular days. It would be comforting to say I started drinking more or sleeping in the cab of my truck with the light on, but the truth is uglier. I just absorbed it. It became part of the private math I did every time I drove. Speed, fuel, weather, a place where the world thins. I started timing it so I would hit mile 47 on the hour when other cars might be on the road, even at night, even if they were just long-haul rigs putting their own ghosts between towns. Sometimes there was nothing there, and those nights I got home thinking I'd finally thought my way out of it. Sometimes there was a car parked with its lights off, a different model each time if I focused on details, which I did. Rounded trunk, squared hood, missing hubcap, a different dent, and yet always the same car in the deeper way, as if you can change the costume on a person without changing the face they wear when you aren't looking. Twice I called highway patrol when the angle looked like it could kill someone, and both times the officer who returned my call said they drove the stretch and saw no hazards. The second one, a woman with a coffee-rough voice, said, "You're not the first to call about 47. You aren't even the first tonight." She said it like she was telling me rain was wet, but her voice got softer at the end, like she had learned not to say people's names on late calls. On June 18, 2023, a storm sat over the Sabine and flung rain sideways for hours. I waited it out at work and left late, 3:41 a.m., wipers beating, road shiny and carved into small moving rivers. At mile 47, the sedan was there. Black, low, lights off, nose down like it wanted to drink the ditch. The rain made a curtain out of my beams. My headlights painted nothing beyond a few feet. I eased by at 35. The mirror had been steady for months because I had made a rule not to touch it. But the rear view began to tilt by itself, a slow grind like something with half-broken teeth turning, and settled toward the ceiling so that the only thing it showed was the faint suggestion of the roofliner and, in the very bottom edge, the top of a head in a different car than mine. I said no out loud, as if no works on objects, and put my hand up without touching the glass. The mirror tipped back on its own, a fraction, like whoever was in there was also considering me. I drove the rest of the way with my hand in the air, not touching it, an idiot gesture that made my shoulder burn and my ribs feel tight. When I pulled into my drive at 4:06 a.m., the street was empty, no glare off any other windshield. I slumped forward for a second, my forehead on the steering wheel, and that was when I smelled the inside of a different car. Cold ash, mildew, the kind of wet that lives in carpet. My dome light clicked on, though my door was still shut. I don't have an explanation for that part. The next day, I bought a cheap dash cam and pointed it toward the windshield, not the cabin. I told myself if there was a perfectly normal car at mile 47 and I just kept thinking it was strange because I was coming unstitched, the video would show me the lie I preferred. The night after I installed it, I drove out at 1:58 a.m. and parked 300 yards shy of the marker, engine off, rain just a memory in the smell of the ditches. I watched the dash cam screen, a boring gray feed of my own hood and tumbleweed sky. At 2:13 a.m., a dark shape rolled slowly out of the tree line and stopped exactly where it always stops. No headlights flared to life, no brake lights. It was a body without circulation. I hit record, though it had been recording already. In the green static of the cheap sensor, the car didn't look like a car so much as a negative space shaped like one. The rear view in my truck swung, unpowered, toward the windshield. In the dash cam screen, tiny, fuzzy, I saw the vague outline of a person inside the other car lean forward, not toward the road, toward me. It wasn't looking at the highway, it was looking at the angle where my camera was. In the video, the dark windshield grew darker, like someone had put their face close. I turned off the camera with my thumb and left. I know how that sounds, but the idea of having the footage felt like tying a string between my house and that mile marker, something that could be plucked later, and led it straight along the line. For a week after that, I took the long way anywhere. The road got into my sleep. I woke up at 2:10 a.m. on nights I didn't have to be anywhere, sitting up on the couch with every light on, and my phone face down like it was a live thing that might watch me back. My daughter came over and asked if we could do late-night ice cream. I said no, too fast, and she studied me and said, "It's okay, Daddy," in the careful voice she uses when she wants me not to break. Sometime in early August, someone put up a little wooden cross at the base of mile marker 47, plain and unpainted, with no name. It lasted 3 days before it vanished. The grass where it had been was mashed down like someone had sat in the ditch and waited. I started counting cars when I drove by, like that could anchor me. 1 rig, 2 pickups, a van, me. And then mentally subtracting the car with its lights off because it never counted. It didn't have plates. When I ran my hand along the back of my own rear view to check that the set screw was still tight, I felt a curious nick in the glass. Low, center, not in the reflection. I scratched it with my nail and my nail found the groove. If I leaned at just the right angle, the nick aligned with my left pupil in the glass. It was tiny as a pinprick and perfectly placed for an eye that wasn't mine to look back. I covered it with a circle of electrical tape. That night, the mirror vibrated on a road that was otherwise smooth, like a cheap guitar string plucked by a patient hand. I wish I could build to an ending that makes the kind of sense endings make. What I have instead is this. Last winter, December 3rd, 2024, the warehouse closed early for inventory, and I drove home in a brassy gray daylight that made everything look harmless. I thought about stopping at mile 47 in the sun, stepping out, walking the shoulder, proving to my bones there was nothing but gravel and a stupid sign with a number on it. I didn't stop. The next night, I worked late and left at 2:02 a.m. back to normal, the highway breathing like it does when it's empty, pavement smell and old pine. At the curve before the marker, my radio fell quiet again, except this time it sounded like someone had put a palm over a microphone. Then the voice came through. Not on my speakers, in the air of the cab, right level with my ear, like a seatmate in an old car. It used to said my name softly, the way people do when they want you to lower your voice. It asked if I could give a hand with a mirror. My hands shook so hard I had to lock my elbows to keep the truck straight. The car at mile 47 was there, and for the first time its interior light was on, a weak dome glow that didn't quite reach the dash, and for the first time I saw the driver's side door slightly open, not enough to catch air, just unlatched. A line of black between frame and weather stripping. I looked straight ahead, because I had learned that lesson like a prayer. Don't look into other people's cars at night. My rear view tipped on its own until all it showed was that thin, bright slice of someone else's open door, and the hint of a shoulder that never changed shape no matter how my truck moved. I passed, kept going. At 2:19 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered this time because doing nothing felt like drowning. There was no greeting. There was the sound of a finger pressing a map light on and off, the little plastic click over, and under that a breath that wasn't tired or angry, just patient. I hung up and the phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It left 6 seconds of that click and the small, rubbery groan of a mirror pivot being turned too far. When I got home, the electrical tape dot on my rear view was gone. The adhesive ghost was still there. The dot itself was stuck to the center of my bathroom mirror instead, thumbed on at the height of my eyes. I didn't put it there. I didn't go into the bathroom before seeing it. I stood and looked at my own reflection with a black pinprick on it and didn't touch it. Then I went back outside, opened my truck, and turned the rear view completely upward so it showed nothing but the inside of its own plastic casing. I have left it there ever since. I know that sounds like a small, dumb kind of courage, but it's the only kind I've got left for this. People have suggested a lot of fixes. Trade the truck, take the bus, move. Every suggestion carries a little joke in it until the person sees I'm not laughing. One friend said, "Next time you see the car, flash your brights," and I said, "It doesn't have brights to flash back," and he said, "That's not what I meant," and neither of us spoke for a long time. I don't drive US 190 at night anymore. I stack my hours to leave before midnight or after sunrise, and if I can't, I sleep in the office chair and pretend that's normal. But last week at 2:47 a.m. my landline rang, the old phone I keep plugged in because my cell loses signal during storms. The caller ID said private. I picked up, half asleep. There was no road noise, just a small, cheerful ding that cars make when a door is ajar and the key is still in the ignition. Once, then twice, then a third time with a breath between them like someone had leaned back in the seat and was waiting for me to lean too. I set the phone down on the counter, and it didn't hang up for a full minute, maybe longer. The timer on the base counted to 4:07 before it clicked. I walked to the window over the sink and looked at my quiet street. No headlights, no taillights, no cars at all. In my reflection on the glass, because the kitchen light was on, I could see myself, and the room behind me. And for a second, in the place where a rear-view mirror would be if the window were windshield, there was a tiny black dot, perfectly aligned with my eye. Then it wasn't there. Every time I wash that window now, I feel like I'm swimming towards something instead of wiping it away. I tell myself this is just a story that happened on bad roads to a man who was too tired to make good choices. I tell myself that mirrors don't remember for other cars and that mile markers are just numbers. But if you drive east out of Woodville after midnight and you see a car pulled off at mile 47 with its lights off and the rear view tilted wrong, don't adjust yours out of curiosity. Don't slow down to peer inside. If your phone rings, let it. If your dome light clicks on by itself, keep your hands at 10 and 2 and your eyes forward. And if you wake up to find a piece of tape you know you placed on one mirror has moved to another, don't peel it off. Leave it where it is and walk away from the glass. I can't tell you that will keep the voice from learning your name in the perfect, soft way strangers do. I can only tell you that sometimes, on clear nights at exactly 2:11 a.m., I hear the polite ding of a door that is not mine opening somewhere very close, and I keep the mirrors in my house turned toward the wall until morning. Story 3, the church bell that rings underwater. I'm not a storyteller by trade. I work maintenance at a paper mill outside Jasper, Texas, and on weekends I do volunteer dives with the sheriff's office when they need an extra set of hands in the water for recoveries or evidence searches. That's how I ended up at Toledo Bend Reservoir the night I heard the bell. If you don't know Toledo Bend, it's the kind of lake that swallows towns and keeps their names on maps like a joke no one laughs at anymore. They flooded the Sabine bottomlands in the 1960s, and whole places, Patroon, Barlow, Carter's Ferry, went under. There's an old story about a church out past the Texas shoreline, near a drowned roadbed marked on the sonar like a scar, and a bell that supposedly rings when storms roll in. I didn't believe it, and I still wish I didn't. August 24th, 2023, was the hot kind of day that makes metal taste like pennies when you breathe. The bank thermometer in Hemphill read 101 Darif at 5:08 p.m., and even at 11:38 p.m., when I backed my truck down the ramp by Huxley Bay, the air was a wet shirt. We were there because a bass fisherman named Coulson hadn't come back to the rental cabin he and his brother took for the week. His John boat turned up beached in the weeds with the trolling motor still down. People disappear on big water all the time without anything strange attached. And that's what I told myself when Deputy Harris waved me over and said, "You're certified and you know this lake. Do you mind?" I said, "Sure." My friend Nate ran the sonar across a grid while I suited up. We weren't doing a deep technical dive. This was wading a drowned neighborhood, 20 to 30 feet down at most, with a silt bottom that climbs into your mask if you kick wrong. At 12:16 a.m., I rolled off the side of the aluminum boat into water that felt like sweet tea. The thermocline hit around 16 feet, a sudden cool that made the skin under my wetsuit feel like it didn't belong to me. Visibility was maybe 3 feet with a light. Without one, the dark was complete and honest. I kept my beam low to avoid blinding myself with backscatter and moved slow, hand over hand along the drowned fence line, the way you do when you're trying not to turn somebody's wife's last hope into mud. I found a plastic lawn chair tilted sideways, a child's rusted bike frame tangled in pipe vine, the roofline of something square and small, pump house or smokehouse, half buried in silt. Somewhere above me, Nate idled the boat and called time every 10 minutes. At 12:47 a.m., after the second sweep, I heard a low sound that wasn't the usual underwater noise. You learn the language down there, the hum of your own regulator, the distant tremor of a boat, fish bodies thrumming when they break and run. This was none of those. It started as a weight in my chest, like being in a church when someone touches the first key on an organ far away. Then it became a tone that filled the water evenly, not too loud, not soft. A bell struck once. I froze and watched my own bubbles find the ceiling of silt and die. I clicked my transmitter twice to get Nate's attention and heard his answering click, tinny through the water. The bell sounded again, 2 beats, maybe 10 seconds apart. I swept my light and unhooked the safety reel from my belt, because 2 rules can sit in your head at once. You can be terrified, and you still tie off to something solid because losing yourself in the dark is worse than whatever you're afraid of. My beam found a line of cypress knees like knuckles. The bell came a 3rd time, and the tone pressed through my sternum and settled somewhere behind my teeth. I can't explain that part better. I can tell you the pitch was lower than the church bells I grew up with in Kirbyville, and truer, like something meant to carry across flat land before there was glass to stop it. I followed the fence to where it met a brick corner. The bricks were the red, crumbly kind they used for schools and small courthouses in the 1930s, black with algae now. I brushed the corner with my glove and a slice of silt rose and drifted like a curtain, and behind it was a set of wooden steps descending to a doorway that no longer led to air. The 4th toll spread through me so that for a second I thought the regulator in my mouth had become the clapper. I swung my light into the doorway and saw a short hall with doors on either side and, at the far end, a rectangle darker than the surrounding dark. The wood was swollen and furry with water rot. Something flickered at the edges of my beam, the way fish do when they turn their sides and catch light. I turned my head, and it was gone. In my earpiece, Nate said, "You hearing that?" His voice didn't sound like his own, flat, small. I clicked once for yes. He said, "Harris says the weather's building fast, 15 minutes. I should have turned then and marked the spot and come back in daylight. I should have done the responsible thing. Instead, because fear sometimes looks like stubbornness in my body, I tucked and went through the doorway. The silt lifted on my fin tips and turned the world into beige snow. I kept one hand on the wall and one on the line, counting door frames under my glove. 1, 2. The left-hand door was open, the right hand closed. I put my hand against the closed one and the wood moved a fraction, like it had swelled against the frame and was now considering options. The bell rang a 5th time, closer now. Something shifted the water in the hall, a very small current against my jaw, like breath barely moving hair. I finned forward until my hand found the jamb at the far end and the space opened into a larger room. The silt didn't want me to see it. It kept climbing like dust when a kid runs across a sunlight square. I cupped my hand over the light to scatter it and the structure of the room stepped into shape. Benches bolted to the floor, a low platform at the front, a rectangle of darkness on the wall where something had once hung and was now a stain. It was a small church, or a meeting house, and it sat only 20 feet beneath the mess we call a lake, and it hadn't disintegrated yet because the water here is slow as sleep. I floated at the back of it and felt the line quiver in my hand as the boat moved above to adjust for wind. I turned my light toward the ceiling and saw a square hole framed by beams. The bell would have hung above that, up in a little tower. The idea of it rusting on its yoke and still knowing how to ring made my throat go tight. The 6th toll was soft enough I almost didn't trust it, like a sound remembered. I turned my light down and something moved in the first pew, not big, not dramatic, just the kind of displacement you get when a person in a heavy coat changes their mind about standing or sitting. I shot the beam there and caught only silt falling in slow ribbons. 5 minutes, Nate said, the radio beep echoing off the hall. I wanted a reason to put my hand on the front pew. I wanted a wallet, a key ring, a hat pin, anything to justify why it felt like a crime to leave. I swam forward and caught a glint, a brass hinge lying at the foot of the steps to the platform, greened over with age. It could have been from any door, from any building, but it felt like proof that this room had once opened and closed and counted people in and out on Sundays. I tucked it into my belt. That's when I noticed the floor by my knee had a ripple in it, not like water, but like the boards themselves had been pushed up from underneath at an angle. Floods do that. Pressure does that. But the pattern was too neat. 6 boards lifted slightly side by side, in a shape like a shallow trench. The 7th toll wasn't a strike. It was the after sound, like the metal warming itself for something else. My regulator hissed in my mouth and I tasted copper as if my nose had bled. I reached down without thinking and slid my fingers under the lifted board. The grain was slick with slime. I pulled up and the plank arced and broke with less resistance than I expected. Silt mushroomed. In the hole below was black and then something pale. My light found cloth, a sleeve, and then the idea of an arm. My brain and my body split. My body let go of the board and the board swung and trapped the sleeve, and my brain shoved my hand back down to free it because the last thing you do in this work is disrespect what you find. As I worked the wood free, something touched the back of my glove. I yanked my hand up. It could have been cloth settling, it could have been nothing at all. But in that second, the 8th toll rolled through the room and all the silt lifted at once like someone had blown out a candle and the smoke stood up to watch. I kicked back, lines singing in my hand, and the hallway was suddenly too small, too used, the way a stairwell feels when everybody in a building decides to evacuate at the same time. I made the doorway and the fence, and the cold layer of water felt like air because my chest hurt from shallow breathing. When I came up, it was 1:09 a.m., and the wind had pulled the lake into flat green plates that lifted and slapped. Lightning stitched a line across the Louisiana side. Nate leaned and grabbed my strap. "What the hell was that?" He shouted over the engine as we motored to the ramp. I wanted to say nothing. I wanted to say a bell. I said, "There's a room down there," and put the brass hinge in his hand. It didn't feel like proof anymore. It felt like a ticket I shouldn't have taken. The storm walked the lake until dawn. I slept 3 hours and went back with Harris and a proper team at 10:15 a.m. Clouds broken, 84 degrees of cicadas grinding the air to paste. We dropped a weighted marker where my GPS said the meeting house sat. In daylight, the water was bottle green and friendly until you dropped under. We sent down a camera on a tether first. The feed showed what I'd seen only in slices: pews, a platform, light, dusting down like snow in a gym after a roof cave-in. No bell, not in frame. We decided to leave the room alone until the game wardens could clear it as a historical site. The call wasn't about a mystery, it was about a man named Coulson. We found him half a mile down the drowned road at 2:17 p.m., snagged in wire near the old ferry pilings. In my report, I wrote possible accident, entanglement, because that's what the scene said, and because words are bad ways to hold grief. His brother cried quiet in the shade of the trailer at the Huxley Bay store and talked about how the fish were biting like they were supposed to and how he didn't understand currents. I didn't tell him about the room or the bell. That night, when I got home, my house had that smell places get when a storm leans on them. Wet wood, old dust, something like onions if you haven't cleaned under the sink in a while. I showered long and hot to cook the lake off me, and when I turned the water off, in the brief silence before the fan tucked the noise back in, I heard a single, clean tone from the drain. It was so pure I smiled before I realized what I was doing. I told myself pipes do that. Metal contracting, air pockets, the whole science of houses settling. The next morning I found silt on the rubber bath mat in the shape of a shoe sole I didn't own. I vacuumed it and told myself it was dirt off my own feet. I put the brass hinge on my kitchen counter because if you're going to steal a souvenir from the bottom of a lake, you should at least look at it and understand what you did. At 3:41 p.m., while I was standing there with a coffee mug that had cooled past drinkable, the hinge rocked on its own and made a little tapping sound, once like it wanted to be back where it had been. I put it in a drawer with the spatulas. 2 days later, the Lake Area News ran a small piece about a rumored sunken chapel getting a safety review, the way papers do when there's nothing else to fill a column. My phone lit up with people I hadn't heard from since high school asking if I'd seen the ghost church. I ignored them. The only person I texted was Nate, who sent back a single line. "Every time it thunders, my dog barks at the sink." The next week, I stopped at Thibs in Orangefield after a shift. 8:52 p.m., the glass door breathing cool air every time it opened, and an old woman in a denim jacket looked at the silt on my boots and said, "You go down there for the sheriff." I nodded because denying things to weathered faces feels wrong. She told me her grandma used to say if you hear a bell underwater, you don't answer it, you don't count the rings, you don't even write the number down because numbers make doors for the wrong kind of thing. They built that lake on fast prayers and bad maps, she said, and she tapped 2 fingers on the counter in a rhythm that didn't match the song on the radio. I wanted to ask what church it had been. I wanted to learn the name of a pastor who had counted heads in that little room on Sundays. Instead, I bought crickets I didn't need and left. That night, at 12:03 a.m., my kitchen light flickered once. The storm had moved south. The sky was clear, no reason for a blink. From the backyard, I heard a single metal knock, like a spoon against a pot, and then 3 seconds later another. I went outside barefoot and stood on the damp concrete. The air smelled like hot wire. The knock stopped. In the morning, there was a ring of wet on the patio table like someone had set down a bucket, but nothing else was damp. I can make this all sound stranger than it is if I want. I can string together the late-night knocks, the drain tone, the way the brass hinge warms under my fingers when thunderheads stack over the pines on the Louisiana side. But the piece that won't sit quiet in my head is simple. When I dream now, I don't dream of the lake. I dream of a small room with bolted benches and a square of missing brightness above a platform, and I'm always in the back row with my hands on my knees like a man who came in late and didn't want to be seen. And somewhere past the wall that should face the road is water pressing like a crowd. Last month, September 2nd, 2025, at 2:19 a.m., my landline rang. Yes, I still keep one for storms. I let it go to the machine because I don't answer unknowns after midnight anymore. The message is 12 seconds long. You can hear my own house in it, the fan, the refrigerator hum, and then a low tone, pure as a tuning fork, and then a second, a fraction flat like a bell that's taken damage but won't admit it. On the 7th tone, yes, I counted even though I promised myself I wouldn't, the machine clicked like someone had lifted the receiver in another room. No one had. I was standing in the hallway with both hands empty. I deleted it because that felt like the strong thing to do. The next morning, the brass hinge was sitting on the edge of the sink instead of in the drawer, and the drain smelled like the lake, a clean rot, the kind that means the world goes on without you. I put the hinge back, closed the drawer hard, and turned the faucet on to drive the smell down. The water thudded the pipes and made a sound like a struck bell would make if it had been buried and taught itself to speak through iron. If you want advice, here it is. Don't take things from the bottom of lakes. Don't put your name inside rooms that don't hold air anymore. If you hear a bell where a bell shouldn't be, don't count along and don't answer. I say that and I still keep the hinge. I still listen. 2 nights ago, a cold front blew in from the northwest, and the power flickered. At 1:14 a.m., the same time we marked Coulson in the report on the day we found him, my phone lit with an unknown number and didn't ring. The screen just showed calling, with no sound. Down the hall, water in the pipes shifted like it does when someone in another apartment turns on a shower, except I don't live in an apartment, and I was the only person in the house. I stood very still and listened to my own breath and to the hum of the old refrigerator motor, and underneath both I heard a tone so faint I thought I was imagining it until the coffee mugs in the cabinet made a tiny, sympathetic chatter. It stopped before I could decide what to do. I don't have a moral. I don't have a lesson. I have a room sitting under 20 feet of Toledo Bend, and a bell that rings when the weather changes, and a small piece of metal I shouldn't have that sounds hollow when you set it down. If you ever fish that lake on a flat night and the water goes still in the way that means the air is about to move, and you hear a note that feels like a finger behind your ear, don't say anything out loud. Don't write the number down. Don't bring anything home. And if you realize, on some ordinary afternoon while you're rinsing out a cup, that the tone you're hearing is coming from the dark inside your own drain and not from outside at all, don't put your ear too close to figure it out. I leaned in once, just to be sure, and something in that narrow black gave a patient little answering ring back, like a person in a pew who knows your name and wants you to know they stayed after everyone else went home. If this story left you looking over your shoulder tonight, you're not alone. Subscribe now to Silent Fears, the only place where the real Appalachian horror still whispers through the dark. Share your own encounters in the comments below, because the next haunting tale may be yours. Story 4. Dispatch Line 12. The caller with no pulse. I worked nights on the dispatch floor in a low brick building behind the county jail, a place that smelled faintly like burnt coffee and pine sol, even when no one had mopped in days. If you've never done 911, it's not what TV makes it. More paperwork than panic, more waiting than adrenaline, a lot of listening to people breathe while deputies try to find the right driveway off a county road with 3 different names. My shift ran 6 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock a.m., and by 2 o'clock a.m. the building always felt too quiet, like the fluorescent lights were the only things staying awake on purpose. We had 12 consoles arranged in a horseshoe. Dispatch 12 was the lowest traffic line, overflow and admin transfers, so new people got stuck there until they'd earned the fun seats. By the fall of 2023, I'd been there long enough to prefer 12. It was slightly removed, a step out of conversations about exes and fishing and aches. The night it started, October 19th, the weather had broken after a hot week. The parking lot was slick with a thin rain that made halos around the jail yard lamps, and the bank sign on Main read 58 to GF at 11:12 p.m. I remember those numbers because I wrote them into a trespass call log while an elderly man described, through apologies, a raccoon in his kitchen. I sent a unit and a shrug. At 1:03 a.m., the call queue was empty, the deputies were trading jokes on tack 2, and I leaned back to stretch the pain between my shoulder blades. That's when line 12 lit without ringing. The LCD read, Unknown, Internal Transfer, which is normal when the sheriff's office sends us something out of hours. I tapped my headset. 911, where's your emergency? Nothing. Open line. Not unusual, you get butt dials and fights and TVs. But this had no ambient sound, no room tone at all. It was like someone put their phone in a closet full of blankets and then walked away. 911, I repeated. I heard, so faint I almost blamed the HVAC, a dry inhale and a careful exhale. No panic, no hurry, the opposite of someone in a burning kitchen. If you can't speak, stay on the line, I said, shifting to the script. Press any key twice. The call timer ticked over to 0:22. Somewhere in the building a chair squeaked and somebody laughed at something I hadn't heard. The breath came again, near the microphone, like someone leaning close to see what would happen if they whispered. Then, in that same careful pace, a woman's voice. I'm here. Nothing else. I felt the small hairs on my forearms lift the way they do when you step into a walk-in freezer. What's your location? I asked. Can you tell me where you are? A beat. Yes, she said, and I thought, good, she's calm. Where? I asked, pulling up the ALI-ANI screen with my left hand, looking for cell tower data or a Phase 2 GPS blob. The display stayed blank. Not delayed. Blank like the call hadn't come from a phone at all. The woman said in the same quiet tone, Evidence. Evidence, ma'am? I tried to feed her a sentence she could just nod into. Are you at the evidence building? We have a separate bay across the lot where they store seized vehicles and boxed items. Can you tell me the street? Downstairs, she said. Blue tape, locker 6. I put her on hold for half a second to wave at our night supervisor, Ronnie, whose mustache and patience are both the kind you don't get rid of. I've got a weird one on 12, I said. Says she's in evidence, locker 6. He frowned the way people do when their teeth hurt. Transfer? I shook my head and showed him the blank location screen. He picked up his extension and tried to join the call like we do with translators. The board showed him in the channel, but I didn't hear his breath come into my ear, which is how you know someone's there. Only her. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice level, the way you do when you don't want to spook the animal with the leg in the trap. Can you tell me your name? You know it, she said. Not accusation. A fact offered. I don't, ma'am, I said, which was true. We want to help you, but I need your name and your address. Silence. I heard paper move, very soft, like the sound a cardboard edge makes when it slides. It's cold, she said. I need you to send someone to get me. Tell him the door sticks at the bottom. The timer ticked 1:38. My heart did that double beat thing where you feel like you tripped on a step that wasn't there. Who am I sending? I asked. Who do you want me to send? A small click near her microphone, not electronic, wood or metal. You know, she repeated, and then slowly, like she was sharing a secret that wouldn't matter in 5 minutes anyway. Ask him why he called me back. That sentence sat in my ear like a stone. Ronnie was suddenly beside me, not on the extension, one hand on the back of my chair, eyes on the board. "What's the line show?" he mouthed. I pointed. "Internal," he read, and his eyebrows knit. "Ma'am," I said, heartbeat too big in my throat. "I need you to stay with me. Are you able to move? Can you walk?" "No," she said. "He said to stay put and be quiet. He said he'd come back." Her voice thinned on the last word, not from crying, but like a signal fading over a far field. In my periphery, the clock on the wall rolled to 1:44 a.m., and the rain patted the windows like fingers. "Who is he?" I asked. Pause. Per again. A rustle that made me picture a box lid lifted and set lightly aside. "The deputy," she said. "The one with the ring he doesn't wear at work." People tell you that when you do this job, you'll hear details that are too sane to be made up and too strange to be ignored. I started typing with hands that didn't feel attached. Possible person in evidence bay claims immobile. Locker 6, female voice, calm. Request unit. But calling a unit to the evidence bay at 1:44 a.m. with no alarm trip, no sign-in, no camera ping. The policy book in my head flipped pages. I hit the intercom for the jail sally port instead. "Trustee to evidence hallway," I said. "Supervisor to monitor." Ronnie shook his head once, just a degree, like, slow down. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" I asked. Because while your hands do policy, your mouth has to keep the person on the line. And while your mouth does that, some older animal in you counts the beats between answers and decides which way to run. "I got lost," she said. "I wasn't supposed to be there. He told me to wait." I heard that faint scrape again, cardboard on metal, like someone pushing a box deeper into a shelf. "He said he'd keep me safe." The breath she took after that sentence shivered, finally. He kept the phone. The console beeped. Another call. I stabbed at the hold and told the queue to reroute to Kim on 3. "Okay," I said. "Tell me about the phone. Do you mean your phone?" "No," she said, and then a long exhale like someone fogging a piece of glass to draw on it. "His." "The deputy's," I said, not sure if I was prompting or repeating. "Which deputy?" "The one who calls victims back after," she said, and I felt something go rough under my ribs. It isn't policy to call from personal lines. It happens. People are people. They promise to check. They mean well. They forget that lines are lines for reasons even when they read good ones. I wrote names in my head and then chased them out. "Can you hear any other voices?" I asked. "Any traffic?" "No," she said. "It's quiet here." He said that's the point. The call timer read 4:02. Ronnie's fingers pressed a tiny warning into the foam of my chair. In the corner of my vision, the camera monitor for the evidence hallway popped from black to gray. Motion. A trustee in orange, guided by a jailer, appeared at the far end and paused at the locked door. The jailer keyed in and held the door open as if the dark on the other side might breathe. The trustee stepped in like a man in a haunted house who expects his friends to yell "Gotcha" from behind a freezer. The hallway light flickered once and steadied. Our jailer looked up at the camera and yawned on purpose like he was paying the place a compliment. My headset chirped as Ronnie patched the jailer's radio into my monitor. "Evidence hall clear," the jailer said. I watched him walk the trustee to the roll-up door, check the padlock, tug the hasp, slap the glass over the keypad on the inside door to the back cages, all the performative competence that keeps your own heart where it belongs. "All secure," he said. "No sign-in, no open doors, no weird." I looked at the call screen because sometimes calls are like dreams. They evaporate when the world says your name. Still there. 4:49. I swallowed. "Ma'am," I said. "Our officers checked the evidence hallway. They didn't find anyone. Can you describe exactly where you are?" Silence. And then that breath again, as close as if she'd leaned into my ear. "I told you," she said. "Downstairs. Locker 6. She sounded patient, like people do when the person on the other end of the line is too busy to listen closely. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice flat so it wouldn't wobble on the word downstairs. Our evidence bay is 1 story. The jail is 2. The courthouse, 3. The only downstairs that matched her voice and the words blue tape sat inside a room none of us on shift had clearance to open without the day detectives, the cold alcove off the main evidence room where sealed cases lived while appeals were a thing you could still do. I typed to Kim, "Ping, detective on call." She wrote back, "Already did." No answer. The rain ticked harder. The woman on 12 said very softly, "He left the light on." "What light?" I asked. "The small one," she said, like I was supposed to know. "Above the desk, it hums." I stared at the ceiling where our own lights hummed like old flies. "I'm going to keep you on the line," I said. "I'm sending someone who can open the door. I need you to tell me if you hear footsteps." "Okay," she said. Something in her voice made me think of someone sitting cross-legged, elbows on knees, a posture you take when you're trying to be small and good. "He'll be glad you called," she added. "He said he didn't mean to forget me." I turned my head so Ronnie wouldn't catch my mouth moving around that shape of sentence. The timer read 7:02. The call never clipped or glitched. It was clean the way clean rooms are, like the sound had been filtered through something that hated dust. The detective on call, a tired man named Sanchez who could sleep standing up, finally answered Kim's page at 1:57 a.m. and came in soggy and blinking by 2:21 a.m. He is one of those men who never asks, really, if you say, "Come." He badge opened the external door to evidence, thumbed a signature on the log, and held his hand under the light until it came fully awake. He glanced up at the camera on purpose so we'd see his face and not just his shoulders. "You want the inner?" he said into his lapel mic. "Yes," Ronnie said. "And the cold alcove. We all pretend we don't call it that in daylight." The inner cages clanged and clinked in a rhythm somebody's hands taught them years ago. Sanchez moved slowly, a thing I admired even while my jaw clenched, because going fast in rooms like that breaks more than it fixes. Our jailer stood as a polite wait at the door in case something needed a second pair of human eyes. I said softly, "Ma'am, we have someone at the building. Stay with me." "I'm here," she said, in the same tone as the beginning. "Do you want me to knock?" "No," I said, because for a heartbeat the idea of sound moving both ways made my stomach drop. "Just tell me if you hear anything." The cold alcove door had two locks, keypad and key. Sanchez keyed and keyed. When the red light on the keypad turned green, the hum in our building changed in my bones. The way you feel a refrigerator fall silent and understand that silence is just another noise laid over the world. The detective put his shoulder to it and said, off mic, like a man thinking, "Sticks at the bottom." I typed the words before my brain had time to digest that he'd said them, and then I read them on my own screen and tasted sour in the back of my throat. "Ma'am," I said, "we're almost with you." "I know," she said. "I can hear the light." "What light?" I asked, to keep her in this moment instead of whatever else she'd been inside. "The small one," she said, like before, kind but tired. "You were there when he turned it on." I felt the room tilt exactly 1 degree. I have never been in that alcove. Dispatchers don't go. We don't need to. At 2:33 a.m., the door gave and made a sound my headset caught even though it was only a whisper on Sanchez's mic. Old felt peeling from a frame. He went in. The camera feed, such as it was, showed only the outside of the door and the corridor beyond, a rectangle of ugly tile. The jailer outside flexed his fingers as if the skin on them had shrunk. "Lights are on," Sanchez reported. "Desk lamp, too." He stood quietly for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, the woman on 12 said, very near, "I'm here." Then the detective said softly, like a man standing in church, "Hello." We all held our breath like boys in a dare. "Nothing open. All lockers sealed and signed. Looks like blue tape on 6. He paused. "That's a weird note." "What note?" Ronnie asked, carefully not asking, "What do you mean?" "On the side of the locker," he said, and we all heard the crackle of old tape moving under a fingertip. "Blue painters," someone wrote, "door sticks at bottom," with a smiley face, like a joke. I heard the smiley face more than saw it. Some drawn circles travel farther than others. "You see anyone?" I asked, and I hated how my voice lifted. "No," he said. "Nothing moved. Temperature's cold enough my breath shows." He jogged the handle of 6. "Sealed." He set the mic down on the desk just long enough that the line picked up a thin, steady hum that matched the one coming through my headset from the woman's side, and for a second the two sounds braided into one. "Do you smell anything?" Ronnie asked, because this is the South, and we ask that when we don't want to say rot. "Paper," Sanchez said, "and lemon cleaner." He breathed in again and added, "Mildew in the carpet." He cleared his throat. "You want me to open 6? "No," Ronnie said too quickly, because chain of custody is a god bigger than fear, and because opening a sealed locker at 2:35 a.m. due to a phone call no one can print is a career-ending sentence if you say it out loud. "Document what you see. Lock up. We'll review in the morning." "Copy," Sanchez said, soft. I think of that moment most. A man asks permission to open a door, and another man who knows doors says, "Not tonight." On my headset, the woman drew a breath like she had been holding it for exactly as long as it took the detective to ask. "Ma'am," I said, because I had to fill the space with something kinder than what was in my chest. "He's in the room. He sees you." "No," she said, not correcting me, telling me what was true. "He doesn't. Not yet." The call timer read 12:17. The detective's radio scraped as he picked it up. "Exiting," he said. He stepped into the hall, turned to pull the door, and stopped. We all stopped with him because he'd never stopped like that before. Not frozen, but paused like a man at the top of stairs he's climbed 1,000 times when he's suddenly not sure there are 12 steps or 13. "Huh," he said, small. "What?" Ronnie asked, trying not to put "what do you see" into the air. "Nothing," the detective said, but I heard the way his mouth shaped the word. "Door sticks," he added, and pulled it hard until the latch caught and the hum behind it damped. He keyed the outer, signed the log with a scrawl that would later look like anyone's, and looked up at the camera again so we could all pretend the world was the kind of place where looking into lenses meant something. "You good?" he asked over the mic, forgetting to take his finger off so we could answer. "Yeah," Ronnie said anyway, and the jailer said, "Yeah," and someone on tack 2 said something about coffee like a life raft thrown from another boat. When the call ended, it didn't. The timer kept counting. The line stayed live. The woman breathed like she was measuring seconds, and I sat there with my palms flat on the console as if pressing down would keep the room from tilting. "Ma'am," I said, "we're going to keep this line open. You're not alone." "I know," she said. "He called." The word "called" did something to my jaw. It clicked. "Who called?" I asked, but I didn't want her to say it. "You'll ask him in the morning," she said. "And he'll say he doesn't remember." Soft, almost fond. "He will mean it." On the wall, the clock rolled to 2:44 a.m. The rain had stopped. The jail yard light hummed. Somewhere in the building, a toilet flushed like a polite ghost. Ronnie put his hand on the side of my headset so I'd feel the pressure without taking my ear off the line. "When she stops talking, end it," he said quietly. "We'll pull recordings." I nodded. I didn't want to, but the part of me that lives by checklists did. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm going to stay with you until you're ready to hang up." "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Her breath came once more. "It's cold, but it's not bad." I started to say something like "we're coming back," which would have been a lie and a sin, and before I could, she said, almost like she was embarrassed to ask, Could you not use my last name this time?" The headset felt tight against my ear. "What's your last name?" I asked, because I had to. A pause, and then she said it. My last name. Not common here, not on my badge, but mine, said with the same easy certainty she'd had all along. It should have felt like a prank. It felt like someone opening a door politely. I didn't speak. If I had, I would have made a sound a child makes when you pull a splinter that's become part of their skin. The call timer read 15:01. Somewhere far away, a patrol unit keyed up and joked about donuts laying, hick boys whistling in dark halls. "I'm going to hang up now," she said. "Thank you for waiting with me." The line clicked, not like a cell scrubbing out, but like a handset being set very gently in a cradle so as not to wake someone asleep on a couch. The timer stopped. The screen returned to idle. My own last name hung in the room like smoke. Ronnie said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You didn't say it on the call," and I shook my head. He looked relieved and sick at the same time. We pulled the audio. It printed the logs. The phone system showed a live channel with no inbound trunk and no outbound route. We sent the clip to state with a cover sheet that said anomalous, the way you write miscellaneous when you don't want to say miracle or mistake. Morning came, day shift came. Sanchez came back with shaved face and paperwork and told us with careful eyes that in the alcove, on the side of locker 6 under the blue tape, somebody years ago had written in Sharpie, "Door sticks at the bottom." Hey. An inside joke about a contractor. He said there were no open cases involving a woman in a locker. He said all the seals were intact. He said, "You good?" As if that answered anything. We nodded, because grown men nod. The day it ran the clip through every filter they had, they called me into the little room behind the server rack with the soundproofing that never did its job, and they played the breathing back at me, and under the breathing, so faint it could have been the building, there was a 60-cycle hum exactly like the one our old desk lamp in evidence makes when it's on. That's the part I can't file. That, and the way the call timer on line 12 sometimes blips to 003 around 1:44 a.m. Story 5. The House That Faces No Roads. I used to run the late-night route for a medical courier service out of Beaumont, specimens in hard-sided coolers, chain of custody forms rubber-banded to the handles, pickup slips smeared with coffee from ERs that never sleep. If you've driven those roads after midnight, US 69 up past Lumberton and Silsby toward Counts, or the smaller veins like Old Evadale Road and the ones that lose their names to county numbers, you know the way the pine stands press in and the fog sits in the ditches like a living thing. My shift started at 7 o'clock p.m., and if everything ran clean, I was back at the depot by 3:30 a.m. with the coolers checked and sealed, ready for the 4 o'clock a.m. plane out of Jack Brooks. One night in late January, January 28th, 2024, I remember because the weather app said 48 degrees and dense fog advisory. The route took longer than it should have because the lab at Jasper Memorial held a blood culture too long, and I sat in the bay playing solitaire on my phone for 28 minutes while a nurse with a bun like a battle helmet apologized to the air. By the time I made my last official pickup, it was 1:11 a.m., and all I had left was a detour my dispatcher added at the bottom of the ticket stack in blue ink. Stat specimen, private address, leave cooler in porch box. Patient will be asleep. We didn't do houses, too messy with signatures. But when it says stat and a doctor's license sits in the requesting field, you don't argue. The address was a 2-line string that didn't match any street name I knew near Silsby. I punched it into the van's tablet and watched the little blue arrow burn a route I'd never seen, out on FM 418, right on an unnamed side road labeled County Maintained, then left where the map showed a gray stitch of nothing connecting to itself. I almost called dispatch to ask if they'd transposed numbers, but I didn't because it was 1:26 a.m. and the office smelled like microwaved soup and tired promises at that hour. The fog came thicker as I left the highway, a low milk that made retro reflectors look like points of light floating in a black aquariums. I passed a church with the letters missing from its sign and the faint glow of a soda machine bleeding the color out of the concrete. The tablet spoke in a steady woman's voice. "In 200 feet, turn left." And I turned onto a lane with a county culvert pipe that looked new and a pavement surface that wasn't pavement at all. Compacted sand packed with pine needles and the occasional black moss patch slick as soap. After 100 yards, the lane pinched between pine trunks like a hallway that didn't want to be a hallway. The van's headlights cut beige walls of airborne fog that moved in sheets. My radio crackled over from the depot. "Everything good? 7 Charlie?" It was Mel, who liked to add Y to everything. I said, "Almost home. Got a private drop." She said, "Copy, copy." And then, because the night does this to everyone, "Bring kolaches if the Brookshires is open." The tablet chimed. Arrived. I rolled to a stop and stared at nothing. The lane dead-ended into a stand of yapon and pine with no turnaround. I idled. A deer stepped out from the fog, looked at me, and stepped back as if embarrassed. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw a break in the undergrowth I'd mistaken for shadow. Not a driveway, not anything that belonged on a county map, just two ruts, edged with winter grass leading off to the right. The van wasn't going down that. I shifted into park and sat still. And then a light came on straight ahead that I swear wasn't there a second earlier. A rectangle of warm yellow at ground level, like a door had opened on a porch hidden by fog. It wasn't bright. It was the domestic kind of light you get from a lamp with a tan shade. The tablet pinged again and flashed the address like it was proud of being right. I grabbed the small white cooler with the patient label, Wilkes G, and the slip, stuck it under my arm, and stepped into the fog. The air smelled like damp bark and cold iron. The light didn't get farther away or closer. It just existed, steady, a point to walk toward. The ruts took my boots on their terms. I counted steps because counting keeps panic quiet. At around 50, the trees opened onto something that tricked my brain. A front yard. Not a yard attached to a road. Just a green shape tamped smooth like a miniature golf course when the morning crew has rolled it, littered with cypress cones and one lawn chair folded against nothing. The house sat in the center like it had been set there by helicopter. One story, dark shingle roof, white clapper dulled to cream by age, deep porch with the boards running long and a swing hooked on two chains that made a sound like teeth clacking somewhere if the breeze even thought about it. The light I'd seen was from a lamp near the porch door, not a front door, but a side door that faced nothing. The house faced the yard, and beyond the yard was forest, and beyond that who knows, but no drive, no lane, no road at all where a normal house would point its eyes. The windows weren't dark. They weren't bright either. They held a kind of gray the way an unlit television holds a reflection at night. A wooden box sat on the porch beside the door with a label burned into the top. Coolers. I stood at the bottom step and said out loud, because talking to yourself is a seatbelt, "Drop and go." My breath made a small ghost in the lamplight. Somewhere behind the house, a cricket miscounted its rhythms. I climbed the 3 steps and the boards announced my weight like a snitchy friend. I set the cooler in the box, slipped the form into the plastic sleeve on the lid, and turned to leave. Inside the house, very close to the door, a voice said, "Thank you." I froze. The voice was male and polite and pitched like someone who didn't want to wake anyone else. "I'm sorry," I said, automatic. "Didn't mean to." "No," the voice said. "You made good time." I looked at the glass, expecting to see my own face, but the window beside the door was blank the way an eye looks blank when the light is wrong. "You want me to ring?" I asked, buying the seconds it takes to decide whether to run without looking like you're running. "No," the voice said. "There's no bell. The door sticks. Thank you." I waited 1 beat too long. On the wall inside, to the left of where I guessed the door must be, a framed photograph caught the lamp and gave me back a tiny brightness. The frame was dark wood, wider than modern ones. The glass bowed like old glass does, a slight wave in it you can only see at certain angles. The picture was of a family, 3 figures, but the faces were wrong, not grotesque, not horror movie wrong. They were simply not anybody I recognized even at the level of the human template, the fast brain recognition you get even in strangers. The eyes were a fraction too far apart, the mouths drawn the way somebody who doesn't speak this language draws mouths. A little long, adjusted after the first lines were wrong. I took a step back, and the porch swung forward a fraction as if the house had exhaled. The chain on the swing twitched. In the van behind me something beeped, a standard door ajar chirp I'd heard 1,000 times, and in that tiny noise was safety because machines are predictable. I said, "Have a good night," because I am dumb and polite and my entire job is that sentence in different suits. The voice said, "Drive safe." The way he said drive made the hair on my forearms lift. It sounded like a person choosing a word out of a drawer they don't open often. I turned and stepped off the porch, counted the 3 steps without tripping, and walked back across the yard. When I looked over my shoulder at 50 paces, the light was off. The fog closed like a curtain. The lane back to the van felt longer than the walk-in, though it couldn't be, and my boots found a new hole I didn't think I'd stepped around the first time. In the driver's seat, the van smelled like cold coffee and vinyl. The clock glowed 1:58 a.m. I put it in reverse and the backup camera showed static, gray, the kind of snow you don't see anymore unless you've owned a TV older than you are. I used my mirrors and didn't hit a tree, and the tablet chirped, "Proceed to highlighted route," like it hadn't just had me drive to a house that doesn't face anything. When I got to Highway 69, Mel came on the radio again. 7 Charlie ETA? I said 27, and my voice sounded like someone else doing an impression of me. At the depot, the night tech Kayla signed the seals and scanned the barcodes. She checked the manifest and said, "Who's Wilkes G? There's no stat house drop on the sheet." I slid the blue ink slip out from under the pile and put it on the counter. She frowned, because frowning is how you keep from yawning, and said, "Whose handwriting is that?" I said, "Dispatch," and we both looked at the clock, 3:18 a.m., and decided without deciding that the morning supervisor could ask the question in daylight. On my way out, I Googled the name and got a result for Wilkes Garrison obituary, but the link 400 Ford, and I told myself that was just the way local papers break their own archives. I went back the next night because the route said to, and because pretending nothing had happened is the only way to keep small things small. The tablet tried to send me a different way, a left-off 418 onto a road with a name I don't remember now, but I know isn't there. When I missed the turn, the map recalculated and steered me down the same lane with the new culvert. The fog wasn't as thick, 43 to GF, stars behind the haze, and the pines on either side of the van felt less like walls and more like a fence that needed mending. When the lane ended, the ruts were where they'd been, and when I walked 50 paces, the yard opened and the house sat with its patient face turned toward nothing. The porch lamp was already on, the wooden box waited, lid open this time, and the plastic sleeve was empty like a mouth. I set down the cooler and slid the form into place. No voice, no sound from inside. I should have felt relief. I felt like the hallway of a cheap hotel smells at 3 o'clock a.m. Thin soap and old carpet and someone laughing too loudly 3 doors down. I let my eyes adjust. That's when I realized the house was longer than last night. Not wider, longer, like someone had pulled it at both ends the way kids stretch putty to see how long it will go before it breaks. The porch had an extra window, and the distance between the door and the corner was farther. A dumb observation that my brain tried to file under different viewing angle, and fog makes geometry lie. But some mammal part of me has counted doorways since childhood, and it said no. On the inside wall, where the family photo had hung, a different frame sat now. Oval, wood darker, the glass less wavy. It held 3 figures again, but just as last night, none of them lived in my head as people. It wasn't their clothes or their posture, it was the eyes and the distance between features, as if whoever made them was following instructions written in a script with letters crowded by the margins. I bent a little without meaning to see if the reflection from the porch light would give me my own shape in the glass, but the frame threw back the porch, the box, the lamp, the chair propped against the wall like a listening ear, and a fourth shape in the room that wasn't in the picture set a little back from the oval like a person holding still. I straightened. Something creaked in the yard. Just the weird crackling sound warm soil makes when it cools fast, I told myself. I turned to go. It was then that my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from an unknown number. Front. No emoji, no signature. I had the reflex of any delivery driver who's ever had a customer watch a GPS dot, wave and move faster, and then I remembered there is no front here. I pocketed the phone and walked briskly, which is the coward's dignified run. 50 steps back and the fog took the house out of my hands. Back at the van, the tablet showed my icon on a blue line that didn't exist, the map a gray expanse around it like the sea in drawings where the cartographer ran out of names. Proceed to highlighted route, it said. Algorithm calm. The rearview mirror showed my own eyes too bright. I shifted into drive. A human voice from behind me said, conversational and closer than it should have been. Do you need to turn around? It wasn't in the van, it wasn't on the road, it was at the back of my neck. I pulled forward so fast the anti-skid chirped something about control and I hit the highway with one hand tight on the wheel and the other pressing my phone flat in my pocket like a talisman. In the morning, I told Mel about the house and we both laughed too much because humor sands the teeth off things. She said she'd ask the morning supervisor about the private drops. The supervisor, noon loud and full of lotion smell, said there were no private drops on file for my route and we wouldn't do that again. Liability. End of conversation. I said copy because there are rooms in adult life where love is nothing compared to yes. That afternoon, on my couch with ESPN murmuring about someone else's body, I opened the map app and dropped a pin where I thought the lane had been. The app put the pin in a green field with no roads, and when I tried to switch to satellite view, it blanked out to a gray tile that said, imagery unavailable. That happens sometimes in the back of Beyond. It shouldn't happen there. I told myself their van systems use different mapping vendors and maybe my phone wasn't loading because my Wi-Fi puck was acting up. I tried again that night before my shift. The pin had moved a half-inch to the south on its own. I deleted the pin and the little blue circle jumped back like a fish left your hand. I went in anyway. We go back to places until they become normal, or we do. On February 2nd, a Friday, it rained hard enough you could smell the iron, and the Brookshire sign at 1:07 a.m. flashed and went dark. The route ran smooth until it didn't. The tablet threw up make a U-turn at a cross street in Counts. I know like my own throat. I ignored it. It recalculated and sent me to the same lane as if it had been waiting for me to say no. I shouldn't have gone. I went because the blue ink handwriting cropped up again on the last slip. Stat, leave in box, with the same neat capital S that hooks down farther than it should. The lane was slop. The van fishtailed. The fog was a physical thing you could lean your shoulder into. The porch light burned steady. The wooden box sat open, and the door inside was a darker dark. I set the cooler down and the plastic sleeve on the lid breathed, a subtle inhale like someone had pulled it to read the form. The lamp hummed. From the long interior, longer again. The wall had eaten a nail hole and grown another at the far end. I heard a whisper that I didn't think was directed at me at first. Don't move. It came companioned by the smallest sound, a fingernail clicking once against wood in a nervous habit. The voice was a woman's, and sounded like she was keeping the words between her teeth so they wouldn't go too far. I stepped back. The door wasn't latched. It sat against the jamb like somebody had closed it until privacy, but not safety. I felt stupid for thinking that. And then, very clearly, close to the crack in the door, a man's voice said, I said I'll get the rest. Stay. The hair at the base of my skull lit. He sounded annoyed, not cruel. The kind of man who's always half worn by weather and makes everything into just a minute. He sounded exactly like 100 men I've thanked on 100 porches in neighborhoods where the dogs pose like columns. I turned my head to say something about the cooler and saw, in the oval frame's glass, not 3 figures but a hall. The frame was reflecting a hallway that didn't exist in the sliver of house I could see from the porch. A long hall lined with frames that carried no pictures at all, only reflections. In those reflections were people who did not stand in the hall, caught at bad angles, like when a mirror shows you someone behind you at a party you swear isn't there. One, a woman with damp hair pulled straight back. Another, a boy holding a rim of a hat too big for his head. A third, a man whose face I can't make stay in my mind even now. My breath touched the glass. It fogged and cleared. In the bottom corner, where my shoulder should have been a smudge, there was nothing. The lamp flickered once and hummed back to life. Sorry, the man said from inside, as if apologizing to me and to her and to the boards. Damn switch. I walked backward off the porch without turning, placed my boots where empty space had saved them before, and set my foot wrong on the second step the way you do when a stair has a different height than it did yesterday. I didn't fall. When I looked up, the oval frame showed only the porch again, and the lamp and the wooden box. The door eased closed a fraction more on its own so that the crack became a slice, and the slice turned into a seam, and then the seam wasn't there at all, like a mouth going quiet. My phone buzzed. Unknown. Thank you. I didn't reply. The tone sounded like a bell tiny enough to fit in a pocket. I stopped taking that route a month later and told my boss it was the hours, but it was really the house. On March 15th at 1:24 a.m., a driver named Corey took my shift and called me from the turnaround on 69 near the church with the empty sign and asked, "You ever get a private drop up here?" He said the map was sending him on a road that ain't, and we swapped grown-up lies. No man, just the clinic run, because naming things makes them hard to step around. I watch the lane markers more now when I drive any back road. When the fog sits right in a ditch and the white paint breaks, then reunites, It looks like the world is only built where you put your eyes. I have not tried to find the yard in daylight. I tell myself that's because I respect people's privacy. The truer reason is small. I think the house doesn't want to be seen that way, with sun shaming everything into detail and a road crew filling potholes that never existed. 3 weeks ago, a different kind of thing happened, and I don't have a drawer for it to live in. I came home from a swing shift I picked up and found that my own hallway, the one between my living room and the bedrooms, 8 steps long, was 9 steps long. Not longer in the tape measure way, longer in the way that counts il. The pictures on my wall, my sister's kids, a Topo Chico label I framed because I thought it was funny, hung with a slightly different spacing, an extra inch you would only notice if you put them up yourself. The nail holes behind them didn't match. I pulled one frame and checked. My old hole was half filled with plaster I didn't apply. I stood in the new distance and thought about the oval frame in the house and the way it made a hall where the eye said no. I put the frame back crooked and walked to the kitchen to make noise on purpose. My landline rang at 2:07 a.m. when no one sane was awake. Unknown. I let the machine take it. The message is 6 seconds long, something that could be a porch swing chain clicks, once, like a tooth tapped with a butter knife. Then a man's voice, calm, distracted, daylight normal, says, "Door sticks," the way you describe a known defect to a neighbor who's borrowing your mower. The click at the end is a mouth closing against a gentle wind. Now when I brush my teeth at night, I catch myself checking the mirror at the angle where the hall lights back into itself. Twice, there's been someone else in that angle, never in the main glass, always in the corner where silver loses its nerve. The first time, it looked like a boy waiting to be told the ride is here. The second time, a silhouette too smooth to be anybody I've met. Each time, by the time I turn my head, it isn't there, and the hallway is 8 steps and my pictures hang exactly where I put them. I can't swear to any of this in a way that will hold in another person's head. I can only offer the pieces and the times and the weather like a grocery list nobody asked me to keep. January 28th, 1:58 a.m., fog and pine. February 2nd, 1:07 a.m., rain and a porch lamp that hums. March 15th, a text from Corey that said, "NVM found it when there's nothing to find." 2 weeks ago, a ringing phone in a house where nobody calls after midnight on purpose. If you drive those roads and your map asks you to turn where the county never poured the aggregate, do what you want. People don't take advice well in the dark. But if you see a lamp burned warm in a place where no house should face, and a wooden box labeled coolers, and pictures on a wall that give you back faces that don't work, don't go up the steps unless you can live with the hallway in your own place moving by 1 step someday, and the memory of a man's voice saying a simple, ordinary thing like instructions about a sticky door in a room that somehow runs on routes no one will ever print. If a text arrives later that says, "Front," don't write back, "Wrong house." It won't argue. It will just wait. And if your own mirror, at an angle you never liked before, starts to show a long space lined with frames that don't hold photographs, turn off the light and count your steps to bed. If you reach 9, don't say it out loud. Just slide your hand along the wall until it finds the switch, and let the dark put the house away again, wherever it goes when people are looking in the right direction.